All right, for all of you that have been watching the previous videos on the new Sniper 2, we're going to kind of go through some of the changes and some of the things that you're going to need to do when you initially get this thing installed. We're going to assume that you've got this thing installed correctly, okay? Very important. If you've read or watched our previous videos, that's really important. So we're going to go over a few things, setting this thing up, assuming we already usually start with using the handheld and going through the wizard. One of the things on the wizard, hey, if you've got a performance cam in the thing, don't pick a performance cam. Pick a mild cam, because they usually set these things up way too rich and then try to let the learn sort of fix everything. So that's just a word of advice. Just set it up as a mild cam and kind of go from there. So we'll walk you through setting this thing up. All right, so we're gonna work with the first part of setting one of these things up. And one of the things that you need to do is you need to go into the target air fuel ratio table. And if you look just how generic they set it up, okay? Here's your RPM, here's your vacuum or your map sensor here, okay? And as you're idling, you're usually somewhere around here. And as you start to accelerate, it moves up and up. And here's wide open throttle at the top. So these are just set up very generic, okay? What you need to do is, like I explained in the previous video, is you need to figure out where your car idles. And you'll look over here and find out where it idles. And then you need to figure out, hey, what is it like, okay? And I always start with the fuel first, and then I'll go to the ignition timing after. I've kind of figured out what I want. And there's just basic knowledges. I mean, unless you're turbocharged, if you're just a naturally aspirated engine, stuff's pretty basic, okay? So this engine's got a really big cam in it, and so it really doesn't make a whole lot of vacuum, and I don't know specifically really yet what it was idling at KPA-wise, but I'm gonna assume it's up here in the 60s. And 14-to-1 on this engine is probably okay. What I'm gonna do above this here is take this 14 and I'm gonna bump it down. And so I usually just use the control button and the down arrow keys, and we're gonna drop those things down. And the nice thing is Holley uses a heat map, so you can see where your things are changing. And as far as cruise values go, 14-to-1 is pretty good here for the most part. On a milder engine, man, I'd have this thing cruise at 14, 2, 3, 4, 5-to-1. Idle, same thing, 100%. So one of the things I'm gonna do here is actually take this thing, and in these upper ranges, you're only gonna use these most of the time as you're accelerating from an RPM. It's gonna go up and you're gonna want more fuel in there. So we're gonna lean those out, or richen those up a little bit. So what you can do is, this is just going to be our preliminary stuff here. And you're going to want to take and you can kind of smooth the transitions. These don't have to be all the same values. You can take and step them so they change as they go. In fact, like, we'll take this row here and we'll drop it a little bit. And 12.5-to-1, that's fine. On wide open throttle, I generally would do anything from 12.5 to 12.8, depending on what you got. So anyway, so that's what we've got for target air fuel ratios. Just changing them. And as we run this thing, I'm gonna play around with them a little bit. When I absolutely find out where this thing's cruising at like 60, 65 miles an hour down the highway, I'm gonna play with those and see what the engine can tolerate. You kind of want to go as lean as you can without it being an issue. And one of the things where you'll find is, if it's an issue, is if you're trying to pull a grade or something like that, if it's got too much timing or it's too lean of a fuel mixture. So, and I'd always try to err a little bit on the richer side than the leaner side. So We're gonna go over here to spark, okay? And again, you see how it's grayed out? And by the way, once you change this with the laptop and you go to the 2D table like I'm doing here, you won't be able to change your idle, cruise, and wide open throttle values from the handheld anymore. So as far as spark timing goes, I'm not sure specifically what this engine's gonna work at. 16 degrees is pretty good. But it goes 16, 24, and then 34. I'd rather see a little bit more of a transition myself here. So what we want is once you bump it off idle to start ramping it up a little bit. So we're gonna actually add a little timing here to make the transition a little smoother. So we bumped it to like 19 degrees, and you can see it changes. Now on a Mopar, it's 34 degrees, a big block Mopar, that seems
38.
Pretty, okay, 38. So, I'm gonna leave it 34 here, and then we're gonna have it basically gradually go up to, 38. But I think I'm gonna start with maybe 36. So what I'm gonna do is kind of go from here, highlight these cells here, and then we'll bump them up. 36. Okay. And we've got 36, 35. I'm going to think this row here, we should probably make it 35. And we didn't go to the 36, excuse me, 36. So it's nice that they use this heat map function on here, because otherwise you wouldn't know that these numbers are different. Some of the earlier versions of the Holley HP software didn't have heat mapping on it, and you could have some weird numbers in spots, and you wouldn't really easily be able to see that, and that's pretty crazy. So basically, again, this is going to be your idle range. This is going to be your cruise range. This is going to be wide open throttle. And what you want to do is smooth the transitions in between the two. You don't want big jumps. The way they've got this set up is it's got big jumps in it. And one of the things that you can do, there's a button over here, a smoothing button. So if you have values here that are high or low and high here, it'll kind of transition them in between. And that's kind of a good feature to do. So once you get your main areas fixed, like I said, I'm going to run the thing. We're going to run it at idle, figure out where it idles, and then figure that out. And then what we're going to do is, drive it and find out where it cruises at. We know where wide open throttle is. Wide open throttle is going to be right here at that 105, 95 to 105 kPa. So anyways, we'll fire this thing up at idle, and then we'll start, always start first with the idle before we do anything else. Okay, so we've gone into the drop-down menu here, set static timing. We've set it at 15 degrees. Now we got the timing light. And we've confirmed that we are at around approximately 15 to 16 degrees, and that's close enough for now. We'll check it later at a higher value. All right, so one of the things that we noticed on this engine was it doesn't make a lot of vacuum, regardless of the issues we had with it before. It's idling at around 85, 86 kPa. So basically we've rendered almost this entire lower part of this map useless. And this is kind of an extreme situation. This is a big cam. It's a 440, but it's got a solid lift cam in it, and it's like 250 something to almost 260 degrees at 50 thousandths. And so that's a big cam, okay? And so it's idling up here. So what we've really had to do is concentrate on this map here and narrow it down. Now you can change your scaling over here, and that might be something we do in a long-term situation, is change our scaling. Since we're not really using stuff down here, we can actually make our map start down here at, we'll find out what the cruising KPA is, and then we can actually, instead of it starting down here at 20, we can make it start at like 42, which would give us more resolution up in this area, so we don't have to make big skips in between the stuff. And those are extreme cases, and again, this car probably wasn't the best example of what we need to do. So one of the things that we did here is you go into the timing, as we played around with the timing, because it's idling way up here now instead of way down here. So we've played around with that, and then if you notice, it idles. We got this thing idling at 1,000 RPMs, and that's where it's really happy. And by doing that, we were actually able to get it to idle. It was reading at, more like 90 kPa, and we were able to get it down to like 85, 86 kPa. And that's 5 kPa at idle is quite a bit of change in engine vacuum. So the engine was definitely happier. And one of the things that you can do is kind of like you do on a carburetor, lean dropping it, is play around with the air-fuel ratio, and I'll start this thing up in just a second, and play around with it, and then look at your KPA, and remember that as the thing drops down, that's going down. Lower the number on the KPA is more vacuum, okay? The higher the number is less vacuum. So you can play around with your air-fuel ratio and your timing, just like you can with an old school carburetor, to try to get the best vacuum. And you can even find idle timing at 20 degrees, 25 degrees. It's not a big deal, And the beauty of it is you can make it 25 degrees here. Let's go here to the timing. You can make it 25 degrees here where it idles, and then actually, as you accelerate, make it drop down a little bit. And you can really get a good idle out of something. So let me fire this thing up. And we've already set the throttle blades and the IAC. So when this thing's hot, you want your IAC, you go over here, and I watch it in this little window, the IAC, you really want it to be really low. Even if it's almost, if it's at its target idle speed, and it's at around 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you're good, okay? You don't want it to be at 0 and be 200 degrees or 200 RPM above your target idle speed. So let's fire this thing up, and we'll give you an idea how this thing runs. So as you can see, it's on its IAC, and it's idling a little bit above its target idle speed, and then it'll actually ramp down, back and over a little bit, and you can see what everything's doing here. And our KPA is somewhere in the 80 to 85 range. And what you really want to do to get a smooth idle is make sure that these boxes, these values, as that bubble moves around a little bit, are as close to the same, not big leaps and changes in between the two. And on the Spark, you want the same thing too, because as it changes half a degree of spark moving around, it's gonna make the idle hunt, and that's how you're gonna get a good smooth idle out of it. Okay, one of the things in the setup that you got to make sure that you've got going on is you got to just make sure that it defaults to this, that you've got enable closed loop, you go into learn, enable fuel learn, and right now these are all set at 100%. And one of the things that you'll do is, as you've got more the fuel map more dialed in, you will want to change these numbers to a smaller value. And generally the learn, I would take it down to around 30-40%. The closed loop, same thing, around 30-40%. And the reason why is that's for seasonal changes in weather and atmospheric conditions and stuff like that. And one of the ways that you can really tell how much your thing is obviously your O2 correction. But one of the things that you can really do is you can go over here to your learn table, okay? And your learn table here is really kind of the heart of the self-tuning Holley stuff that is so famous for. And you see in the red there, I mean, that thing's saying it's 40 something percent fuel. And, you know, this is where it's idling, and I've probably revved it up a little bit, and it's gone into this section, then it's dropped down, and then it's gone back to idle. So one of the ways you can, once you get your system really dialed in, and what you'll do occasionally is you'll transfer this right here. It says transfer learning to base. Like you'll click this, and it will actually change the numbers in your fuel table here. Okay, see this table here? It'll change those, okay? And so when you go back to your learn table, and on a really good long-term learned engine, these numbers will always be changing, and you'll see minus point something, minus 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, and that's a good map. You know, once you get to that point, you know, you can just leave this thing alone, and you're done. But for the time being, once I run it quite a bit, I will actually take and do this transfer learning to base. And it'll say, do you want to smooth the value? Sure, you'll do that. You know, go ahead and do that. And so now your base fuel map has been changed. And if you see, it looks kind of sloppy now. And you got to be careful. And that's where the smoothing feature up here comes in. You can actually highlight this and re-smooth it. And so you can see that it made changes to the fuel map. It's probably a bit premature. I was just doing it more for the video effects of this thing. I haven't transferred this to the ECU, so it really doesn't matter. But you know, this is stuff that you know you're going to do long term, and this video is more of just a short setup thing. But looking at your learn table here and seeing how much changes are being made is really telling you how hard the Holley's working to make everything right. And again, you're making everything right to your target air fuel tables that you set. If you don't set these correctly, the Holley's going to learn to a air fuel ratio or timing table that's not necessarily correct for your engine. So again, key points from this video: find out where your engine, you know, idles at, and try to make your idle KPA as low as possible. So play with your timing a little bit, play with your fuel. Generally get the fuel about right. You know, most engines are gonna be happy. If it's a big nasty engine, it's gonna be in the high 13s to 1 at idle, to, you know, a very mild, you know, small block Chevy or something, you know, maybe 300 horse it's gonna be happy, man. It'll idle as lean as 14.7, 14.8. I mean, God, even probably 15 to 1 maybe, but you know, be safe and go somewhere in the mid 14s if you have a mild performance engine. So, you know, get those all figured out and get the lowest KPA map reading that you can get. And then go drive the thing and find out, you know, where is cruise? You know, you're on the highway, you're turning 2,500 RPMs and 3,000 RPMs. Where are you on this map scale, right? And then tune those areas in, right? And then you want it to be, you know, as lean as possible, that it'll be happy. If you're pulling a hill, you don't want it kind of surging and struggling and whatnot. And then above that, you really want it to start taking a little bit of fuel out, because it needs it at those points. But you know, figure those things out. And the wide open throttle is always going to be somewhere on an NA motor, you know, between that 96 and 105 kPa. That's pretty much atmospheric value. And you'll see that if you just turn the key on and don't run the engine, your map sensor will probably be at what atmospheric pressure is outside, which is going to be in that 96. You'll see that your little bubble will be up here in this corner. So anyways, I hope this stuff's helpful for you. If you guys have any questions, set them in, in the comments, and I'll try to answer them. And if we, like I said, if it's something that reoccurs a lot, we'll make a video on it. And, again, this wasn't the best example. This is more of an extreme example of tuning for an engine that's not, that's more of not a very streetable engine. The customer really needs to change the cam in this thing. So anyways, thanks for watching.